Before we begin, thank you very much to Boise Gang Gaming for joining the Patreon campaign. Very appreciated. Thank you so much. Thank you for keeping the streak going. It is somewhere like over 130 days in a row now, something absolutely absurd. Thank you for going. Thank you for continuing it. It's been amazing. It has been amazing. It's genuinely the reason I can keep doing this. Thank you guys so much. I'm toying with other ideas to add to this to give my patrons more stuff. I'll roll that out soon. I'm also working on a big giveaway when I hit 50,000 subscribers. So if you want to see what that is, if you want that to actually happen, please consider hitting the subscription button. I know a lot of you watch without being subscribed, but it's absolutely free to do. Helps me out without having to pay anything extra. Win-win, right? There's no real harm in just, clicking the button. Helps me out. I appreciate everyone who does it. So, speaking of my Patreon, this is yet another request that I had coming in. Someone wanted to hear my thoughts on Gobots. Genuine thoughts, memories of them, general ideas like how Transformers uses them now, what to do with them in the future, etc. And it's kind of a weird topic because there's a lot that they can do and a lot that they can't do. So a lot of this is just going to be hopes and speculation that is probably completely invalid because of legalities. But for the most part, we're going to try and keep this as realistic as possible. So let's get something out of the way. One of the last times I've talked about Gobots a few times on this channel, but the one that really set people off was I did a Here's 10 episode where the title of it was Here's 10 Ways Gobots Were Better Than Transformers. And I said in the beginning, I said it in the video that I'm playing devil's advocate. And apparently no one really knows what devil's advocates are these days. To boil it down, it is when you are knowingly playing the wrong side, but you are still doing your best to defend it. I know it's the losing side. I know it's the greater evil here. However, I wanted to give it its due. And admittedly, every now and then as a YouTuber, you gotta post something that's going to intentionally get under people's skin, because that drives engagement, Things like that just work sometimes. And there are a lot of situations where Gobots, yes, they genuinely did some things better than Transformers did. Their cartoon had far more accurate designs to the toys than Transformers did, especially Season 1 Transformers. Their version of combiners didn't require any additional parts to keep track of and plug on. Their idea for what Transformers called duocons worked a million times better and were far better figures. We're going to talk about them at some point in this video. So there's a lot. There's a lot to Gobots that I think a lot of people don't give it credit for because it was on the losing end of this, or it was like the cheap kid, the poor kids Transformers. So let's talk like general memories of this for starters. So to be honest, when it wasn't like, I don't recall, and granted, Gobots was off the air and off the toy shelves before I was ever in school. However, I don't hear of things happening then that happen now. When it comes to playground stuff now, there's always kids who want to put down other kids because their clothes aren't as expensive, they're buying the school lunch because their parents couldn't afford a nice lunch from home, etc. Or in this case today, it is Fortnite status. Oh, well, you're only using default skins. Well, you're too poor to actually have real skins, right? Typical bully kid nonsense, right? So I imagine at that point, 1984, I imagine there were schoolyard debates and fights over the fact that, you have, the cool toys, the cool kids have the Transformers, and, the not cool kids had the Gobots. But I never had that in any personal experience. Now, granted, I was too young to actually be there in the thick of it. So I don't think it's so I probably missed the worst of it. That's the thing. So I don't remember that really. See, by the time I was old enough to take all of this in, to be honest, like G1 was mostly done. You'd watch it in reruns because, that show had reruns for a long time. But Gobots didn't really rerun on TV. I don't recall seeing it on TV at all. The only way you could really watch a lot of that was through VHS. And back in ye olde day, back back in the dark ages, when you had, like when Transformers came out with with home media, it was a cassette with one episode on it. This one cassette with one 22-minute episode on it. It'd be this black box, silver label, green print, Transformers from Family Home Entertainment. And that's all you had. And GoBots kind of worked the same way. It's like they had very little in terms of like actual home release. Not like the DVD era where, one disc fits, an entire season's worth of a show. Couldn't do that back then. So the only way I really had, because it was off of reruns, the only way I really had to ingest GoBots as a franchise was through what VHSs they had. And the most readily available one, about the only one you could ever really find? This one. GoBots Battle of the Rock Lords. So for a long time, the only real memories I have of actual GoBots animation was this movie. Now, to be fair, the movie itself is really just a super long episode. You could accuse the Transformers movie of that, but the animation budget is way higher, obviously. Like, they tried to put, like, a big budget, well, not a big budget animation behind it, but they did have a much higher quality of animation, at least. The GoBots movie? Nah. Same budget. Just longer. It's basically 4 episodes tacked together. But this is how I took GoBots in. And then I don't remember the first time, because like I can vaguely remember seeing like the normal cartoon. Like I remember watching the intro on YouTube, like looking up out of curiosity. And this is like over a decade ago at this point. And I can remember like it wasn't unfamiliar to me. There's something in the back of my head that remembered it, but I cannot for the life of me like distinctly remember. I sat down and I watched like the first like few episodes of GoBots. I think it's a 4-part intro to that series, and I didn't remember a bit of it. All it was completely new to me. And I'm sure if I sat down and actually watched GoBots like the entire series, very, very sparse few bits would actually stick out on my mind of like, oh yeah, I think I've seen that. No, it'd probably be completely new to me. It probably would. So I will admit, I am not an expert in the series. Now, I got GoBots as toys the same way that I got most of my Transformers. Yard sales. Just people getting rid of them. And, I didn't have like store-bought GoBots. I had the ones that were left over. So it's very sparing. Like, I had Destroyer here, who I thought was like super unique. Like he was way different than any Transformer I owned. And any tank Transformer I saw back then kind of transformed the same way. Like Brawl and Warpath. There's a few elements to them that have kind of the same thing going on. So this was like a really refreshing version. It's important to note here that even as a kid, it was never just all Transformers to me. Even with limited exposure, I was still very aware of when I was playing with a Transformer versus when I was playing with a GoBot. I don't recall ever confusing one with the other because the designs of the toys were so distinct, and because they generally were vastly different in size and style. So I remember Destroyer, and I remember just knowing it was definitely not a Transformer. But I liked it. It was a neat figure for the time. The transformation on it's super weird. For someone who was used to playing with Transformers. I didn't have too many GoBots. We'll talk about the other ones I have. But a lot of exposure to it was also from friends. Like when I would get left with someone for the day, because my parents worked or my parents had some other business to handle, I would get left with babysitters who had plenty of toys, or their kids that live with them had plenty of toys, and they had Gobots. And that's some of the first and only times I really got to play with any. That's how I mostly took in Rock Lords. My parents didn't really get me anyone except I think Spike Stone. To this day, I can never quite remember which one this was. I can never quite remember Gobot names. But I had this guy. I had a few Rock Lords here and there. None of the major ones. The one I used to have, and I really don't like that I don't own it anymore. I used to have Flamestone, the Ruby. The Gem Lords are so expensive to get your hands on now. And I don't like that, because I always really liked Flamestone, and I really don't like the fact that mine is just gone. There's always that part of me of like, when you got enough money kicking around, maybe go back and get that. I'm like, maybe I don't want to spend $80 on a clear plastic toy. Granted, the clear plastic back then worked a lot better than the stuff now. But yeah, I had a few of those. One of the big ones I had, I knew wasn't a Transformer, was Chaos. Now remember I said they did Duocons better? That's what Chaos is. He's a jet with a carrier truck that could not only mount the jet on as like a takeoff platform and like raised up in the back to give it like a diagonal launch, but when they combined, they made a far more solid and far more playable robot, and a much cooler looking robot too. I really liked how Chaos looked. He's just like a big chunky, transforming robot. And I loved it. It's one of the few Gobots that I can remember owning, and as an adult, I went back to buy again because I have so much nostalgia for that toy and how that toy works. And then to come to find out that there are some that came out in Machine Robo that were even better looking, because they do even more unique styles of combinations, and we never even got them at all. Upsetting. It's very upsetting. If you never looked into it, there's some super cool Machine Robos that never came out as Gobots. It's worth looking up, because there's actually some really interesting ones. The other set of Gobots I can remember is I was fortunate enough that I had a great grandmother on my father's side, and she kept a lot of little toys around for when the grandkids came over to play. And she had, among other things, like she had Mysterions. Like the whole reason I own some Mysterions today is because I remember playing with them at her house. And one of the ones I remember playing with was this guy. This is Pocket. It's from their combiner group. I will admit, this is the one time where I thought maybe I'm just playing with a weird version of Sunstreaker. Because it is a yellow Lamborghini. Because he has those fins on the sides of his head. Right? Like, it looks like some cheap Chinese knockoff of Sunstreaker, doesn't it? I know better now. And this is another Gobot that I actually did. Like the last time I was out on the east coast of Florida, they had it. There was a Pocket available at one of the shops I usually visit, and it came home with me. It's still on my desk. Because that's a really weird and deep cut nostalgia dig for me. So I love having it. There's part of me that realizes I own 3 pieces of Puzzler. I own both legs, and I have a Pocket. So there's almost a part of me instinctively going, maybe you should get the others. I'm not nostalgically connected to the others. These days, I don't really hold any kind of prejudice to Gobots at all. Like I said, I've bought modern ones. They're just other transforming robots that had a different style to them. That's as simple as it is. And like I said, there's a lot of things they did that Transformers did not do. So sometimes it's a great little variety pick. If I want if I'm in the mood for some old school Transformer vibe, but I want something that feels different, I'd go for a Gobot. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, the question here, the request also is the use of Gobots today and how to use them in the future. And this is a minefield. This is an absolute minefield. Now, obviously, Velocitron Crasher is the most recent take on this, and it's the closest we've ever come to just properly releasing a Gobot character. She does look vaguely, the head sculpt vaguely looks like Crasher from the original cartoon, But granted, there's a lot of paint making that work. Painting the domino mask on. It does help that it's a dome-shaped head. Thanks because it's the toy version of the Mirage head sculpt. So that plays into it. That works well enough. But there's a lot of factors here. So it's the fact that. So let's get this straight. Hasbro cannot approach what the original toys looked like because that would violate copyright because Machine Robo is still an active franchise in Japan. It was just a few months ago, Mega House just did a brand new bike Robo. So like there's like a modern bike Robo, aka Cykill, that is available right now. So they are still actively using this franchise. You can't just ape it. You can't just copy its designs and release it as a Transformer. That will bring a lawsuit. So to keep in mind, the reason we get away with Crasher is because to mix her white and black color schemes, because her toy came out in white and black, keeps her familiar to both of those and keeps it close enough to look like Crasher without interfering in both of those. And then there's the fact that it's an Indy car instead of the Dome Racer, and it is using something more akin to the animation face. We are fortunate that while Gobots, usually in animation, are far more accurate than Transformers were, Crasher was an exception. Her face in the show was completely different than how her robot looked, how her toy looked. So we can actually get away with doing a Crasher face because if it's intellectual property, Hasbro has the right to use it. So they can use the unique design elements from the Gobots cartoon. They can use the names, and they can get away with that without inciting any kind of backlash from Bandai. They just can't use anything that looks close to the toys. That's how we get away with Crasher. And that's why the very first attempt that Takara did looks so different. Aside from the fact they weren't officially assigned names. I think in fiction they were mentioned, but never on the box. I think that's how it worked. But this is supposed to be Smallfoot, which you can tell is... the face is definitely not Smallfoot, and the coloring is off. This was part of a multi-pack of Minibots are repainted. Famously, there's a Bug Bite in there that's come on to become like the evil Bumblebee repaint, but Bug Bite in Gobots was a renegade, but he's also a yellow Volkswagen. Bug Bite, actually another Gobot that I have bought as an adult. It's actually Derek Wyatt's. It's Derek Wyatt's Bug Bite. So that's a very precious little piece I keep. But this is how far we could come. Where like we say it's Gobots, and for a little bit we're going to name them close to Gobots, but we're not going to approach it. Like this is as close as we've been able to come otherwise. It's why every time someone mentions Cykill, for instance, when it comes to like anytime a Wreck-Gar is made, there's someone out there that goes, make it Cykill. And they're saying that because they're similar design elements. The wheels that can be removed and rearranged to other spots. Using the arms as the front front piece of the motorcycle. That is approaching the original toy. They can't do that. If they were going to do a brand new Cykill, it would have to be a different vehicle mode that was similar but not correct. Like you'd have to do it as like maybe a trike. Or maybe one of those, like a spider, like 2 wheels in front, 1 wheel in back. But at that point, it's not a Cykill anymore, is it? You need then the cycle pun goes away. We can't have that. It's a sticky slope. Sticky slope. It's a slippery slope. How close can you get while still, like, skirting the line? It's very difficult. It is very difficult. Yes, Hasbro could technically do like a red repaint of RID's Strong Arm and call it Smallfoot, but then it's approaching what the Machine Robo toy looks like. So if we're going to get Gobots in the future, it's got to be very carefully done. You could do Coptor, but it would have to be as like a 2-propeller VTOL. It couldn't be a standard attack helicopter. You'd have to put a twist on it to separate it out. And then you'd have to probably mess with the face because the face is more accurate to the toy. So you'd have to go through. which Gobots had different faces or designs in the animation than they actually had in the action figures. Because that's the only distinction that's going to allow you to get away with, you know, the legal mire that is trying to recreate Gobots without breaching, you know, ownership from Bandai. It's dangerous, to say the least. I think there's a place. I definitely think there is a place for Gobots if you can figure out how to use it without getting into legal trouble. But that is a very, very thin line to walk. So I think for the most part, I think Crasher's probably all we're going to get. If only because she's probably the most memorable Gobot. And, you know, at the very least, the most distinct of them all. And the fact that she can be a go-to remold for for Mirage, I think is a pretty nice little niche. I think she's probably the most important one to get in because it adds to the G1 female roster. But also, yeah, if Gobots is going to have a legacy in Transformers, I'm kind of glad it's her. Because she was doing what Hasbro refused to do back in the day. Be a female with toys, and be a tough female, not stereotypically designed. Again, things that Gobots did better than Transformers. So those are the Gobot thoughts. Those are my memories. That's kind of how I think about where it is now, and if Hasbro could potentially do more. Spoiler, if you weren't paying attention, I don't think they can. I think we've hit the limit. But that's just one geek's thoughts. So, thank you guys for watching. That is my trip down memory lane. Hope you enjoyed the little journey, and I will see you next time.
I'm like, I think you guys got this. I will back away, and I will see you all later.
You've got this handled.
Alafi's like, really? You're not gonna help me? Like, it's fine now.
It's like these disgusting creatures breathing down my neck, and you're all just like, I believe in you. You got this.
All right, you seem to have this. 5 minutes.